What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of Epic Conversations. And I'm the host of Epic Conversations 2020, Best Podcast News in 2018, Best Innovation Award winner given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. Also, I host the only online show in the world for fathers and dads that's sponsored by Dove. Sorry, I got to get that right. By Dove Men Care and Dad Central. Dad Central is Canada's national fatherhood organization. And also, I am the board chair of the Global Food and Drink Initiative, which is a multimedia not-for-profit that's based in the United States, whose mission is to show Blacks in the diaspora that are doing all things in food, wine, and travel. As always, I like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. And it is Black Canada Talking Time. So once a month, we do, it's actually the last Sunday of each month, we do Black Canada Talking, or we get Blacks, Canadians, we either showcase them or we get their POVs on things that are going on in their world. There we got at the bottom, a live online event that provides Black Canadians an opportunity to give their takes and POVs on stories that are of importance to them. And it's our end of month panel time. And we have two regulars and a special guest panelist today. So I'm going to introduce first up our regulars. First off, from the East, Miss Elle Jones. What's going on, Elle?
Hey, well, we just got COVID after not having any COVID. So just went into lockdown and everybody's enraged. So
now?
Well, we didn't have anything really since the first wave, right?
Oh my gosh.
Cool, and since like May last year. And we had a little spike before Christmas, and then people came from Ontario and didn't isolate and spread COVID. So we just went into a lockdown. So everybody's really mad here. But other than that, things are good.
Well, I guess my trip for the future out east is not going to be received so nicely. So
we were opening up; it was all good, and now we're community spread, and we're like as many cases as we've ever had in the whole time. So,
and how long is this for?
Well, we're gonna have 4 weeks to the 20th.
Oh my gosh!
I'm sorry. But, I was in the schools, so we went from no cases to 44 cases overnight, and then we just keep going. So,
but you're okay.
Yeah, otherwise. I don't go outside. I'm good.
All right. As long as you're safe, that's the most important thing. And I know you know a good chef, but that's another conversation. So, all right. Next up, we got our dear friend Cesar. What is up, Cesar?
Brothers, sisters, hi everyone. Pleasure to be here as always. Lots of things going on, of course.
Yeah.
So many things to talk about as always regarding the reality of being Black in a Black body, Black in so many intersections, gender, but also anything and everything. That's why we're here, Pan-Africanism all the way.
Good stuff. And you're safe and okay?
I'm okay. I'm still alive, thanks to the ancestors. Another day, and when we think about the passing of so many of our musical legends that we grew up with, DMX, Black Rob, I don't want to say too much on that, but respect and tributes to the families and also to all the activists, men, women, LGBTQ, of our people who are standing and doing the fight every day, but too often go unknown or ignored.
Respect. Good to have you here as always. And our special guest today from Ottawa, Sarah Onyango. Sarah, where are you? There she is.
Bonjour.
How are you?
Bonjour. No, I'm not in Ottawa. Je ne suis pas Ottawa. I greet you from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people, but on the Quebec side, in Gatineau, Quebec. So in Quebec, we also are in some sort of lockdown, and we've been under curfew forever, it feels like, because we can't be seen outside past 8 p.m., I believe. They had made it later, and then when they saw people were abusing it, they went back to the original. And I think people saw the protests in Quebec City, in my province, where they went to the old port and proceeded to basically try and destroy and vandalize a whole bunch of small businesses that were already struggling. And I have to tell you, the people here they do not take well to being told what to do in the first place, and then being put under curfew and lockdown. So, and the cases, yes, they've gone up as well here, and we're the community spread, and I think maybe Nova Scotia is the same thing. It's being fueled by these new variants of concern. So, but I'm safe and I'm
Good.
well. Merci
Good.
beaucoup.
You are not a regular with us, so if you could
Well,
take...
I'm a regular listener.
Yes,
like
that's
watcher,
true. So
viewer.
you've been on live a few times, but if you can take like 60 seconds to just give a little background on yourself for our viewers, because for many they don't know the good person that you are.
Oh, okay. I'm a community radio and television host, but most of my community media work is in radio with CHUO 89.1 FM in Ottawa, where you can hear myself and my co-hosts, Adrian, Denise, and Patricia, and Jacqueline, every Saturday from 11 a.m. to noon, talking about different issues, including COVID and the budget and policing and all kinds of shows like that. I also host two other African shows, one in French and the other in English. And the TV show is on Rogers Ottawa. And yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Well done. Great intro. Great intro. Looking forward to another epic conversation today. And we're going to start off with a budget. The federal budget was released earlier on in the week, and a very interesting document. Money seems to be going out all over the place, especially to the Black community. And I wonder why it is. But let's, Sarah has a little bit of a good case on the budget. So Sarah, we're going to let you lead on the conversation.
Yeah, I have an unfair advantage because I happen to work for a media organization that specializes in parliamentary affairs and politics, etc. So I have no choice but to follow this stuff. So basically, the budget was tabled on the 19th, and by the first ever female Minister of Finance. So, a little history being made there. And a budget that had a feminist bent to it. And we're going to talk about, the commitment to childcare that is in that budget, $30 billion for that. But again, interesting to note that once again, investments were made to address issues that are critical to Black Canadians and where we live. So investments to support Black community support programs, race-based data collection, public service recruitment. That's not so much money as it is amending the Public Service Act, mental health supports, Black entrepreneurialism, and we're gonna, I'm sure, have something to say about the Black Endowment Fund that is also in the budget. And I'd like to really salute all of the Black-led organizations and advocates. There were over 200 Black-led organizations whose efforts and participation in pre-budget consultations led to some of the measures that are included in this budget.
Okay. So thank you so much for the overview of the budget. Responses, any initial reaction from Elle or Cesar? I have a few thoughts, but I'd definitely like my co-panelists or the panelists to ask any questions, because it seems that Sarah's more adverse. And I know a little bit, I was involved in the pre-budget consultations myself too. So Elle, Cesar, what are your initial comments or thoughts, if any, when it comes to this budget?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Sarah, for breaking this down for us, because I followed a little bit, but it's very complex. So I really am really glad that there's Black people out here that are specifically pulling out what's relevant to the Black community, because otherwise we have to go through this all ourselves. So thank you so much. That's why it's really important to have Black voices in the media. I actually didn't know some of that you were telling me. One of the pieces that stood out to me is more money for drug courts. which may sound good, but is concerning because at the same time, Canada has been sort of undergoing a process to rethink our drug laws. And this is related to something we're going to be talking about later, which is, of course, the George Floyd, the verdict for Derek Chauvin. And I think it's really important that we think about George Floyd's case in the context of the war on drugs as well, right? That like the whole defense case was basically like he was on drugs, he died because of drugs, and essentially he deserved to die because he was on drugs. So this long war on drugs that also creates stigma against drug users. Canada has slowly been trying to dismantle some of this. So Bill C-22, right, where we decriminalize simple possession, but we maintained a lot of penalties. And so there was a lot of pushback on that. And then now we have expanded money for drug courts, which suggests, in other words, that we're going to keep criminalizing drug use. Like drug use is a medical issue and it shouldn't be in the courts, period. And the problem with drug courts is that it still creates a penalty. And then if you like relapse or, you something happens, you end up with actually more penalties. First, you've gone through drug court and had to go through all of that. Then you end up breaching your drug court conditions and you end up with like more charges. And it's worse than if you'd just gone to jail in the first place. So we really don't want any kind of compelled treatment for people who are using drugs. We want people to obviously voluntarily go into treatment if that's something they want or need. So that's concerning, just seeing that money go. It like looks good on the surface. So it's something that people are like, okay, good. We're trying to move people out of the criminal justice system, but we can't just make a medical system that becomes a criminal system. Like a medical system has to be a medical system based on best practice. It can't be a criminal system. So that's just something that stood out to me. The other thing I want to talk about isn't directly to the budget. And I hope, Sarah, you come back in and give us some of the more technicalities because this is actually really helpful. But there's been a sort of broader conversation going on in the Black community about money. So BLM has been in that conversation, right? There was that sort of what has happened to the money with BLM Global Network. So not the individual chapters, not the general people that make up a mass movement, but specifically some of that leadership. And I don't want to get into that. Some of it's being fueled by the right wing. Some of it's obviously coming from Black people who have been launching critique for a long time. But what it raised for us is, I think, a really important question around just ethics and money and how do we be transparent with the community and what does accountability look like from Black organizations and people. And that's a conversation that's been really difficult to have in the Black community historically and always gets kind of co-opted. Like again, with the BLM conversation, it originated with chapters that are trying to have that conversation. And of course it gets co-opted by white people who then it becomes like, who has this house or, what, it isn't really the conversation, which is around when we have money, how do we equitably distribute it? What are the ethics and principles behind that? The broader question is, what does it look like in this time if you're making money from this movement? What do you owe back to your community? And those are really important questions. So I think it's just interesting that we've been involved in a kind of broader conversation about what finances mean in the Black community, how we manage that, what happens when we get our hands on money, that may be also related to this conversation about the budget. Like, what does it mean when we're giving money to Black, which is like never any money. Like, I never want to buy into this idea that like oh no, 200 million. I always say these are rounding errors on reports. Like the government spends more to decide if they should shift garbage day than like they give Black people to sustain our entire lives across Canada. But even with that, we've seen, all the issues around who's Black to get money and like what that looks like. So I just think that's an interesting conversation as well, right? Like what are the ethics of money, community money and collective money in the Black community? And that's what I'll say. And Cesar, but I also, Sarah, I hope you can jump back in and give us some more particulars because that, like I said, that's been really helpful.
Cesar?
So, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Al. All right, let's get controversial. Some of the criticism that has come regarding the federal budget is that it's an electoralist budget. There's a historical lens. Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland announcing it. Some people talk about a feminist budget, notably in terms of millions in 5 years to come regarding daycare. I welcome that, but it's an electoralist budget because it seems like, it seems at first glance like a lot of gifts to minority communities and notably Black. I welcome it. I welcome it considering all the pain and harm that not only COVID has created, but also the economic recession that we're in. In terms of the questions that come in terms of the potential management of money, this is really a conversation that in terms of Black community, we must keep improving. We already had that conversation, notably regarding Black Chamber of Commerce, regarding even other organizations that as Black people, we are too often aware of how public funds tend to come into organizations, and too often they don't get redistributed. They don't get to be seen by the average Black person. And too many, by nepotism, use organizations to enlarge the bank accounts for some offshore slash interest back home in Africa and the Caribbean. However, in terms of all the pain that has come, at least since 2020, and notably with COVID, social determinants of health, I mean, this budget, in terms of trying to address Black entrepreneurship, I believe up to 200 millions, but also social activities and community organizations. And I must say, I think we have to, I don't want to say celebrate, because I don't think it should be something to celebrate. It's something that should be a bare minimum, but at least recognition of a minimum $15 wage a day, which, of course, if you ask me, it's not enough, but it's better than what was prior. If I can quickly address the issue regarding the criminalization of drugs and regarding Black people, we must always be honest in recognizing that this is a colonial land, and by default, it's also a racist country. Let's be careful. Absolutely one of the best countries to live in, but systemic racism is very much alive, where to the point the Prime Minister recognized it. And as such, when it comes to drugs and being Black, we basically live in a Canadian society, also the US and pretty much worldwide, where a white person with a drug issue is seen as a medical problem, example, opioids. A Black person, as minimal as it is, let's say even marijuana, is seen as a criminal, and we saw it so well, to give reference to the Derek Chauvin trial, where the defense bluntly put it that they were intending on sowing doubt regarding Brother Floyd drug use, despite all the medical experts clearly attesting that it wasn't the case. It's really a matter of culture. It's a matter of societal conversation. Too often, it's not a matter of facts. It's not a matter of science, and it's not a matter of well-being for each and everyone. So we must address this. But regarding the federal budget, it's better than anything. And if I can just one last thing, a lot of criticism must always be addressed when there is a budget, but we must always be fair. I find hilarious to have the conservative leader, Erin O'Toole, criticizing a federal budget when, as a Black person, he doesn't even recognize systemic racism. And too many Black conservatives tend to be quiet next to Massa when he basically doesn't even recognize systemic racism, aka he doesn't even recognize the indignity to the Black skin and the skin of the family, friends, and other Black people in Canada. I'm sorry, Erin O'Toole has no word to say regarding criticism of the budget for Blacks and notably Indigenous and others.
So I'm going to stay away from the whole partisan thing and get right back.
I'm not a liberal. I'm not a liberal. I just find it funny that he had that criticism.
That's not what no, that's not what I meant. But anyway, yes, indeed, the $30 billion commitment to childcare is going to be very helpful to our Black, mostly single moms, sometimes having to work several jobs and living in poverty despite the several jobs, because they cannot afford upper quality childcare. The problem, though, so this is to fund a national childcare program outside Quebec, because my province, we've had a subsidized provincial-wide childcare problem, okay? And the whole baby bonus and the whole thing. There have been measures for years to support families and having children. But the federal government is going to have to negotiate with all the different provinces, to put that in place. And if we go by what happened with carbon tax, bonjour la visite, okay? Like it's not, we may not even see it before a whole other term of this current liberal government, if it survives. One thing I really want to bring up is that really piqued my interest is this $200 million in 2021-22 that is being given to Employment and Social Development Canada to establish this Black-led philanthropic endowment fund, which is going to in turn finance initiatives by local Black community organizations to address things like, fighting anti-Black racism and just improving the social and economic outcomes of the different communities. And like Elle said, we really don't have the greatest record in terms of, the financial accountability piece when, money like that is given out. And I mean, I'm a board member of a nonprofit, and I know for a fact we have often had to say, nah, we're not even going to try and apply for that, because look at the 10 pages of requirements, reporting requirements we have to do. 1, 2, that's a lot of money for our little organization to try and match. We have to hire a whole other body just to be keeping track of this money. We can't, that sort of thing. So it's all well and good for them to throw that money out. But if we don't have organizations that have the capacity, the wherewithal, the expertise, and the trust, of the communities they're supposed to serve, we'll be going nowhere fast. And next thing you know, money will be returned to the Treasury Board of Canada. And then the government is going to say, see, look at these Black people. We had all this money earmarked. We had the public security money. I saw something, yes, the money to enhance, Communities at Risk Security Infrastructure Program. And that's to work on the security systems of, like places of worship and community centers that are likely to be targeted by racists, vandalism, destruction, etc. So yeah, that's the first thing I thought when I saw these amounts flying all over the place is, okay, who's going to be managing that money? How are they going to be able to manage it? And where are we going to see the accountability? I'm not saying we can't do it. I mean, we have organizations like the BBPA and the Black North Initiative and Taibu and, all kinds of different organizations that do effective work with the funding they get. But
I'm just going to jump in for a quick second here. I think there's a few things, and I think it's another conversation about the whole funding process.
Yes.
There needs to be accountability on the receiver's end, but also on the giver's end. I spent most of last year listening to, and Sarah was in a number of these conversations with a number of Black nonprofit, I will say legitimate organizations that are not being set up for success by the federal government for whatever reason. A lot of times it's processes. A lot of times they have to spend money that they don't have to get the money that they should get.
And then you get the money late. That happens to us all the time. Way past when we needed it, because it takes, 7 months or something.
Exactly.
To process, 20 pages.
So when I hear announcements of money, before we went live, I said, hashtag get the bag. Right? Get the bag, right? And for me, I'm just looking back because there's 221 million. Where is it? There's 25 million. Where is it? So now it's I think what may need to happen is we need to make a list of all the promised monies. And the concerning part is, even if those monies were given out, A, the process needs to be improved. B, organizations that should get aren't getting. So this is a mess. And in some ways, my mind's saying you're throwing money to make a problem worse than it is. And I would rather consultations happen with all the parties to get this process right, than just throwing this thing. And at the end of the day, the people that really need the help aren't getting the help. So Cesar first, then back to Sarah. Cesar, go ahead.
I just very quickly wanted to state that you noticed that I spoke, some may think naively, not naively, I spoke positively of the budget regarding Black populations. But as we are envisaging, looking forward to potential issues, we already had an issue that, to my knowledge, is still not fully settled, aka some of these Black organizations that were being questioned in terms of, are they really Black?
Yes.
So, you see, as we are looking at more influx of money, beautiful promises, bring the elections in summer or September, we know which party most of the Black community will vote for. But did we get an apology? Did we really get fixes? Did some of those organizations that got slighted, aka insulted, regarding the racial belonging to to the Black community, such as Somalis, did they get any kind of compensation?
No.
I mean, are we really having these conversations, or really just like, forget that controversy from a few months ago? Look what we're promising to you, aka white savior complex, dangling a bunch of millions that may just bring more complications, especially in terms of returns, loans. You see, all of these type of things, and then of course interests. I mean, saying, what do I know?
Sarah, go ahead, Sarah.
I think also what needs to happen is within our own Black community, we need to also do a better job of information sharing, because we're finding out here in Ottawa and in Quebec that a lot of the organizations that are not being helped or, get left behind, it's often because they don't get the information. The information is not filtering out from the gatekeepers of the information, the people who know Ahmed Hussein and who hang out with Greg Fergus, my member of parliament, or who know the Michael Jean Foundation people, or know the BNI people, etc., etc. So all the different associations, like national associations and associations that work in the settlement sector, for example, or the ones that cater to young people, young mothers, single mothers, that y'all need to share the information. This keeping it to yourself for what? It helps nobody. It doesn't help you, right? So that's also what we need to do, because the government puts it out there and they slap that on their Canada.ca website, Black this, Black that, Black whatever. But that doesn't mean anything if you didn't go to, Dr. Vibe, the pre-budget consultation meetings and the post-budget consultations meeting that we've been attending.
So I have an interesting question for you, Sarah. You're located in the capital region.
Yes.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. When they are announcing a budget, is it not tradition that they have media in to give them an advance look at the budget?
Yeah, but the thing is, it's in lockup.
So here's my question. Were there or have there ever been Black journalists invited to that?
Ha! There we go. There we go. Listen. No, listen. I've been with this media organization for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And I've been in the physical lockup, because this year for the first time it was virtual. So you didn't really know who was what, right? And yeah, most years it was like, oh, I'm the one Black person and I'm a translator. I'm not even a reporter. Isn't that interesting? Never mind Black media people, Black media organizations and South Asian media organizations and anything that's non-mainstream, non-white media organization. That's one thing you have to say for former Prime Minister Harper, because if you look at, a lot of his press conferences, especially towards, the end, you always had, the South Asian in there, the Black in there, the Chinese in there, asking at least one question. And the mainstream did not like it. The gatekeepers of this access absolutely did not like it because, oh my God, these people were asking questions that were relevant to their communities. You know, immigration issues, policing issues,
All right.
you know, health issues that affect their community, discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. So you are absolutely correct. I mean,
so were you the only Black person in the media lockup last week?
I don't know. It was virtual. And because I'm not a reporter, I'm a translator. So all I care about is what does it say and what do I have to translate? Garbage in, garbage out, garbage in, garbage out. Like I'm not even, and I'm not allowed to let any of it out until the Minister of Finance is standing up in the House of Commons reading this out. And this is done for a specific reason, and there's a reason it's at 4:00. It's because the stock market has closed by then.
Yes.
So it's so that people can't use the information they know ahead of time to go and, you know, do all these transactions that enrich themselves.
Which has never happened. Of course, that's never happened. Right? So see, to me, if they should have, if the government cares about Canadians, you should have Black representation at those lockups. Yeah.
And you know what? I'm putting this call out to the Canadian Association of Black Journalists, CABJ.
Yep.
Yeah, CABJ has now an excellent leadership. They seem, you know, much more active and proactive.
Nadine
this
Stewart.
Is something because they advocate. So this is something they should advocate for. And a lot of the people who run that organization are current or former broadcast journalists who know exactly what you're talking about. So, you know, that would be something they could take on.
Okay. Elle, anything you're wanting to add before we probably move to our second conversation?
Into the next conversation, because I think Sarah's point also around information sharing and gatekeeping is a really important one. And it takes us into something about this moment, right? Because it's not just with the budget that Black people are finally getting, you know, some forms of look in. It's like universities, everybody's committed to 12 hires, 18 hires, all these big hires coming in. I'm like, where are you going to get the Black people from? You know, but then like you kicked us all out years ago, you know, you wouldn't give us PhDs, you wouldn't give us jobs, everybody left to go do other things. And now you want Black academics. And this is what Cesar said as well, right? It's actually a really sort of painful gaslight of this moment that for so many years, it's not like Black people haven't been around doing things, qualifying for things. And they never wanted us. We were garbage and worthless. And now suddenly in this moment, because of PR, not because our lives matter more, suddenly this group and that group and this institution, everybody wants Black people. And they never come and say, you know, I'm really sorry that 5 years ago I rejected your resume and you were qualified and now come back in and here's some reparations, right? Like that doesn't happen. They're just like, oh yeah, now we're hiring people. I'm like, what about all the people you threw in the garbage can? Like, why don't you go back to those people that never made your short list, that got their resumes thrown out, that never got the grants? So but then there's that bigger thing of the way that it forces us into competition with each other, right? So if it's like a Black hire, then you're suddenly competing against all these other Black people. And yeah, there's this like, do you like want to get yours? So do you hoard that to yourself and try not tell people? Or do you like, which is the better way, obviously, act collectively, inform each other, try and get everybody in. But one of the dangers is that when we're given these crumbs and this money and that money, and we have to do it against each other, it forces us into competition with each other and actually can become a huge divide and rule, right? Like who got this money? I didn't get that money. Okay, so my media organization matters because I got government money and I didn't. So, you know, like, and then who has access? So yeah, another question that I think as a community, we have to sort of think about too, right? Like how do we act collectively in the face of, you know, the pressures now that like, if you get yours in this sort of 2-year window that we're going to have, like, do you scramble for yours or do we try and, you know, do it for the whole community? Right?
Well, forget the 2-year window because an election's coming. So
hello.
Yeah,
exactly.
So that's another thing too. An election's coming. So whatever time frame this money was scheduled to come, I'm just saying, and this happens over and over again. When is it going to come? And this is my question to all of us. What have we learned during this last year about us? And are we willing to do better?
And it's
because the game is the same. We have to change.
But one of
the game is still the same. We need to play chess, not checkers.
And
Go
one
ahead,
of the with no, I didn't mean to keep interrupting you. Sorry, you speak more than me, so many pause. I thought you were done. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I don't pause, so I'm confused.
Okay.
Who pause when they sleep? No, I was going to say that this is something to move into the George Floyd verdict. So many white people in particular have tried to treat that verdict like, okay, so now the system showed that it can like be good. So good, we don't need to like do all these major changes. All we need to do is convict. And like that's one conviction. And I saw so much rhetoric coming from particularly white people, like ostensibly liberal rhetoric. I don't mean liberal government. I mean like liberal as in like Martin Luther King, white liberals. That, you know, are like, oh, I'm so relieved because like now we won't have to have this rioting because now, you know, like Black people got what they wanted. So therefore the system works. And I have this like rant about how that I've had for years about how, have you noticed that like every Black movie until very recently takes place in the courtroom? So it's like Amistad is a courtroom movie, Mississippi Burning, courtroom movie, To Kill a Mockingbird, courtroom movie. And there's a reason for that, because the idea is, sure, the system screws you Black people, but the system is also, it just has some flaws. And if you just engage in the system will save you. And court represents that, right? So many of the movies about Black life have been set in the courtroom. In other words, to say the system may fail you, but then it corrects itself. So don't worry going outside the system. And we've been going outside the system, particularly for the last year, where you have a mass of Black people saying the system isn't working for us and we need major changes, not just some money sprinkled, not a couple of reforms. We want some kind of uprooting. And like how we believe in that is obviously a range. You have, you know, full abolitionists and you have people that aren't. But, you know, like as a whole, I would say most people in the Black community, we don't agree on what that looks like, but we agree that something needs to change, you know, in more profound ways. And so what I've really seen from the Chauvin verdict is so many people trying to take that as like, oh, good, the job's done. Like, it's like, that's one verdict. Like, that's the first cop like ever to be convicted of murder, you know, like literally in Minneapolis, it's the first cop. And like, I mean, like normally, even when they get convicted, like what did the Quan McDonald's killer get? 6 years, you know, like they're not even giving them the 100 years that you get as Black youth, you know, for stealing candy or whatever. So yeah, I also find it really interesting how they've tried to make this verdict, even though the whole movement was Black people basically being like, we need to burn it down. They've tried to flip that to be like, oh no, we can preserve the system. Don't worry, Black people, you can still use our system. So that's, I think, a sort of final indignity that's happened in this case, you know?
Even before we got the verdict, Sarah, from a Black person's perspective and a Black media person's perspective, what did you think about the trial? Media coverage wise, and if you can take off a non-media hat, if you can, in regards to that. Also after that, like Cesar's opinion on or thoughts on the trial itself before the verdict was put out.
So I noticed that there seemed to be a very sort of careful attempt at humanizing George Floyd, because as you saw in the court, the only game the defense had was to dehumanize and pathologize this man, human being. Oh, he had drugs. Oh, he had already had run-ins. Oh, this, oh, that, you know. And the media, not except Fox News, AON, and all of those, you know, extrême droite, the right, yeah. Everybody else was being really careful to humanize him. And, you know, I find it helps in the United States that over the last 20 years, there's sort of been a rise in prominence of Black commentators, you know, Mark Lamont Hill, you know, Joy Reid, who actually a whole bunch of them who have their own shows on cable news network and who are on all day, on the weekend, all the time, everywhere. So that there's that counter narrative that's going on at the same time as whatever's going on in the mainstream. So I found that there seemed to be a very careful, deliberate attempt to humanize him. And I'm going to admit, I watch MSNBC all the time. because I want information. I don't want just propaganda, you know, I want actual information. And it's interesting how they were showing the difference between what happened with Breonna Taylor and what happened in this case, notwithstanding the fact that George's murder was actually filmed and was on TV constantly for a while. The attorneys general, 2 Black attorneys general, but 2 different outcomes. And right in my head, like I kept thinking, Daniel Cameron, Keith Ellison, Daniel Cameron. It's not just representation that matters. It doesn't matter if it's a Black guy that's there. That's the police chief. That's the attorney general. That's the prosecutor. No. If that person is not intent on actually applying true justice, like Daniel Cameron was not in Kentucky, you're not getting justice. So it's like in my head all the time, it was like a tale of two situations going on at the same time. I have to say though, I was relieved. I wasn't elated or celebratory. I was relieved. I have family in Minneapolis. They went through last summer. I bought this t-shirt in Minneapolis a year after the Michael Brown thing happened. And I didn't want them to have to now go through this whole thing again with the, you know, the vandalism and the violence and all of that stuff. So I was really nervous. But like Elle, I don't think that, you know, it's system wide. And the president and vice president rightly said, no, this is one case. There needs to be a system wide sort of, you know, reviewing of what's going on. And I'm glad to see that they've decided to start with the Minneapolis Police Department when it comes to examining police practices.
Cesar. You're laughing again. Oh boy.
Thank you, Sarah. I had not thought of the Breonna Taylor and George Floyd at the same time in terms of contrast, but I love what you said about Daniel Cameron. And, you know, as a Pan-Africanist, let us never forget that our heroes, our leaders, our women on the battlefield, the fathers of independence of African countries, and so many Caribbean leaders and Black American, Afro-Brazilian leaders were betrayed by whom?
Their own people.
Mm-hmm. Not all kinfolk are kinfolk. Daniel Cameron, in aiming to be hoping to become a Supreme Court judge, being a Black MAGA, of course, he sided with the white conservatives. But it's not about him. This is about George Floyd, but George Floyd, as so was said, is the tree that hides a far bigger forest, a forest of so many names where we say his name, say her name, and by his and her, there are so many Black children, Black seniors that we must not forget. It's a story in America where we can go all the way back to Emmett Till in 1955. And before that, never forget that if my recollection is accurate, between 1877, so right after the Civil War era, and Black Reconstruction and political participation in the South, from 1877 to 1950, over 4,000 Blacks were lynched, aka beat, castrated, burned, hanged, over 4,000 Black people. And before that, much, much more. Really, since 1619, legally here, but really it's a story of slavery, colonization, segregation, systemic racism from Canada, yes, Canada as well, all the way to Brazil, and of course, Africa, Oceania, etc. So what I would really say regarding the trial, I mean, the cards were visible from the start. We basically had a prosecution that had a recorded murder on tape for all to see. And we had a defense that very bluntly intended to sow doubt in terms of the action of a white male cop versus pathologizing, criminalizing a black man, aka making him pass as a drug user. And as we were talking about the accountability of our own black people. I hate to say her name, but the Candace Owens of the black community are nothing else but the black skin white mask. And when I say white mask, I mean a white KKK hood, agents of white supremacists in the black community will further participate in dehumanizing the George Floyd, the Breonna Taylor, the Sandra Bland, the Trayvon Martin, etc. Everything was plain and clear. Excellent job for the prosecution. They had professional, Dr. Tobin, the pulmonologist, but also Dr. Baker, the doctor who basically conducted the first autopsy. And beyond, of course, George Floyd's girlfriend, but also, the witnesses, the tears, the humanity. There's something I'd like for us to always remember. George Floyd's girlfriend, if I'm correct, I'm trying to make this connection here that I believe I read. George Floyd's girlfriend was, I believe she was Deontay Wright's teacher, or she had been Deontay Wright's teacher. And let us go back to 1955, where Emmett Till murdered, and decades later, the white woman, one of those original Karen, were lied regarding what she went through. She was still free, but Emmett Till, his death inspired notably the civil rights movement and a certain Rosa Parks. Yes, it was arranged at everyone, but it really inspired them to say, enough is enough. We are not going to the back of the bus. Ultimately, George Floyd, the trial, the Derek Chauvin trial. Derek Chauvin is just one supremacist, racist, murderous white cop amongst so many others. And let's not forget, every day in the USA, at least 3 people get killed, and we can bet at least one of them is a black person. People have been killed during the George Floyd trial, and ever since, we have that white woman, Kim Porter, was shot Deontay Wright, claiming she confused with a taser. Let's not forget this police brutality somehow doesn't seem to occur to Jewish minorities, to Chinese, Asian minorities. To some people, it's controversial, but you know what's even more controversial? And I'm going to finish here.
Mm-hmm.
How long did it take to pass the anti-Asian hate bill? Black people have been in America for 400 years. Ultimately, as Malcolm X said, and Malcolm X right behind me, as our hero Malcolm X said, the black man and black woman, black child in America, in the Americas, will not be respected as long as Africa will be weak, and Africa cannot and will not be respected as long as black people worldwide are not respected. The reason the anti-Asian hate bill went so fast is because that country called China is a strong country. It's strong economically. It has strong communities. Those white cops, and there was a study that proved it, a study in New York regarding the frisk, the police frisk, that was very clear in the recommendations to the white cops. They were not to go target the Chinese community. They were not to go target the Jewish communities. They target the black community because we are seen as weak. We are seen as weak socioeconomically. We are seen as weak in terms of identity. We divide ourselves in terms of party allegiances, white parties allegiances, white religions, etc., etc. And what does he do? We are not respected, and we become easily victims by any means necessary. We must free ourselves. Allow me to stop here now. Elle, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say quickly is, yes, it's interesting that some communities who have weaponized the model minority status that they're giving then want to adopt our models of social protest, like it's cool to have to protest. I'm not denying, obviously, the existence of anti-Asian racism, because there's racism to all groups. But I find it really interesting how people, when we hit the streets, how nobody stands beside us. And then our models of hitting the streets and protesting, it's like desirable. So then people are like, oh, my chance to protest. And like, that's interesting, because where were you all these years when we've had to like protest for the basics of life? And again, like, I think there needs to be a reckoning with how model minority status contributes to anti-Blackness. And so how many people have consciously distanced themselves from us repeatedly, right? Where we like affirmative action is bad for Asians. We always hear that. So like this deliberate like anti-Blackness, like giving them access means that, we can't have the access we deserve. Like they have those like schools in New York where they buy tests and like, Black people don't even get a look in at those schools and everyone's fine with that. But then, all of a sudden, and I guess I have to say here before somebody accuses me of something, like I have Chinese in my family, so I guess I can be Black and Asian. So I guess I get to comment on this. I I don't know if we have to give our identities in order to make, political commentary on this stuff. But no, I just find that interesting. And again, it goes back to the same thing I said that, everybody want to use us, when the time is right. As Paul Mooney said, everyone want to be an N-word, no one want to be an N-word, right? And that's like the situation we're always in, right? So the minute we start even getting anything, it's interesting how then everybody has to be so angry that Black people are getting stuff. And what about this community? What about that community? Well, y'all fight for yourselves, Like we've been out here setting the model of all protests. We fight for everybody. Black women in particular carry everybody on our backs at all points. We're not allowed to say or do anything unless we've like checked for everybody but ourselves. And then, people have the nerve to turn around and talk about how we're not supporting this movement and not supporting that movement, as if people have ever supported Black life, including many Black people, as Cesar has pointed out. Like, we're still working on our own people because of internalized white supremacy and like what they put into our communities, like how they reward people like Candace Owen, who's making bank by doing this and was by all accounts a Democrat, and then just like saw the opportunity financially to like become the Black Trump. And we know those rewards exist. So we still have to like encounter that. And then we're supposed to fight for every other community but ourselves too, right?
Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention that really struck me was all those police officers who testified against Chauvin. That whole blue wall thing. It crumbled for a minute, but that was a sweet minute to see, Black current police chief saying, yeah, that's not how we do. That is wrong. And white ex-police chief saying, no, that's not proper police conduct. And more of them just kept coming and other experts saying no. So I'm hoping that this is a signal for the good cops that if more of them would band together and, be doing the right thing, maybe there might be a shift. And another thing that was not lost on me, while this trial was going on of Derek Chauvin, a former Black female police officer, she finally, like a Black police officer who did do the right thing.
In Buffalo.
Yes, in Buffalo, Corial, I forget her last name, but her white male partner was roughing up this one guy that he was trying to arrest for whatever reason. And she got on top of him and pulled him off. He punched her. She got fired. And she was deprived of her retirement, of her pension for 15 years.
Yep.
And only like during this trial, the stories kind of got buried. So just the juxtaposition of all kinds of things. Breonna Taylor, Daniel Cameron, Keith Ellison, Chauvin, Corial in Buffalo, and then of course Dante Wright getting assassinated around the same time.
And I think it's like 64 people got killed during this trial, like Black people. It's a huge amount. So they kept going. And this is the thing is my cynical reading is they were willing to throw Chauvin under the bus to, preserve the bigger system, right? So then it's like, look, the same thing kind of happened in Ontario with, Doug Ford passing, these awful rules. And then they're like, even the cops are against it. It's like the cops move terrible PR. It's not like cops are against stopping people. They're not stupid. An institution knows how to defend itself and preserve itself. Michael says this, the prison lawyer, right? That sorry, Cesar, I'll finish this early.
No, please go ahead, finish.
The crisis is part of the life of an institution, and that institutions experience crisis, and then they use that crisis to reform themselves, and that is what extends their lifetime, right? So on the other side, people always say to activists, like, don't waste a good crisis, right? That when there's a crisis, you have to sort of try and get in there and push things and try and push the crack, because if you don't, the institution will reconstitute itself and claim that they learned from that crisis, but what they're doing is preserving themselves.
as we're saying that, and you know, Sarah making the connections between all these different events. Al, you talking in terms of the institution preserving itself. I'd like to give a big shout out to one of those. I don't want to say unsung hero. I'm going to say it's important to say her name, but she's alive. She's not dead. A young 17-year-old Darnella Frazier will be.
Yes.
She stood there bravely despite the cops, the four cops. And by four cops, the Asian cop who was being very threatening, basically keeping the gate for Chauvin to commit the murder with the two other cops assisting him. Darnella Frazier kept recording. Speaking about the blue wall of silence, or whatever that blue wall of cops and Blue Lives Matter, to what point would Chief Darondodo, I believe his name, the black police chief, but also Lieutenant Zimmerman, and some of these other cops, and also other cops outraged in the nation and in Canada and worldwide? To what extent would they have been outraged, and would they have come to speak up against the practices of Derek Chauvin that dishonor the badge if that young 17-year-old had not stood there to record it? If we did not live in an age of social media and technology as internet to air it. Let's not forget Rodney King, 1992. I'm sorry, if a bunch of black people, black cops, were to beat like that a white person, I think we all know what would happen. There wouldn't even be a trial. You know, some of these internet memes in terms of if the races were changed and that Derek Chauvin was a black cop and George Floyd was a white man, would we even really have a trial? This is the same Minneapolis where the year prior, Somali American black cop Mohammed Noor, fearing for his life, shot at a white woman, rushed towards him in the middle of the night. You know, that excuse that we've heard so much from white cops getting scot-free. He feared for his life. He got 12 years in jail, and the family also got compensated millions. That was justice. Are we really having justice, or is this some type of appeasement? Because now, in a few weeks, we get to have the sentencing. He reached maximum of 40 years, but what is he really going to get? Let's not forget that our sister Sandra Bland somehow committed suicide, but we all know she did it. This is the same system that may sacrifice one of its own, aka Derek Chauvin. But if there was no Darnella Frazier to record it, if there was no social media and internet to air it, and for people all the way to Japan and to Africa, to Brazil, to come on the streets in terms of tarnishing the US image. I mean, the US morality of giving lessons to Russia and China goes where when the Russians and Chinese leaders are like, this is how you treat your black people. And it's not to say Russia and China are not racist. You know what happened last year regarding
Right.
I froze on. I was going to jump in. Interesting. During all this coverage, I think one of the most interesting comments I heard was.
But let's face it, this is really, as Ben Crump and Al Sharpton said, I thought white supremacy was trying to cut off of the air. As Ben Crump and Al Sharpton said, it's beyond George Floyd. It's beyond even Black Lives Matter. It's really the reconning, the questioning of America's soul beyond even America's justice. A nation founded by colonialism, by racism, and that has deep patriarchal, homophobic issues, xenophobic issues. That nation is America. It's not just the land of the free, because you need to make a check marks to define if you really are free.
I'll jump back in. You froze for a minute, Cesar, and I talked over you, so my apologies. That one of the most interesting things I heard during the whole trial was there's an interview on NPR, and the interviewer asked one of the Black residents of Minneapolis, saying, what are you thinking about this trial? And he said, Black people in America, we get laws, but we don't get justice. And I think that was a very interesting comment that stuck out to me, that I'm sure many Black people, not only in America, but in this country, we get laws, but we don't get justice. Any final comments before we end our conversation? Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if like, okay, so moving forward, because we saw how in a case where you have a Black attorney general who's actually about civil rights while applying the law, that he's about civil rights. Because Keith Ellison, you know, I remember when he was in Congress, like he's on the more progressive end of the Democratic Party. So it proves to me that a certain kind of representation matters. Principled, ethical, you know, and competent, because Ellison didn't just put together any old team, right? He put together a certain group of people who he knew could do that job. He was given a mandate by that governor, and you know, he had the legal and emotional intelligence to figure out, okay, this guy was playing chess, not checkers, like the other side, right? So I'm wondering if an increase in the number of AGs with that kind of work ethic and competence and judges, that's another thing I'm hoping that if you color up the judicial system across that country with competent judges who actually are about justice.
So there's so this is where I'm going to maybe be a little bit of a disappointment for you. The previous president loaded up the judiciary system
with Republicans.
Thank you.
I know.
So this is where the concern is going to be, and this is why the next set of elections, the midterms, it's going to be a real fight, because again, the progressive state of Minnesota is not universal throughout the United States. And plus, look, here's another fact, and I don't want Americans to get mad at me, but there's still states in America where slavery is not slavery, hanging is not illegal.
Yeah.
So my concern is the judicial system is all over the place.
Yeah. However, one thing that I'm really crossing my fingers, hoping and praying that I think it's Assistant Attorney General, or the person that Biden wants in charge of the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department.
Is that Merrick Garland?
No, he's the Attorney General of the United States.
He's a big player too.
No, I'm talking about the Civil Rights Division, which deals with cases like this, you know, police brutality cases and anti-Black hate and white supremacy and that sort of thing. The Republicans are trying to not have her confirmed because they know what she's going to do once she gets in.
Yeah.
So yes, it's you know, it's disappointing that there aren't more. However, if right at the top you have someone who is going to empower AGs like Ellison, etc., across the country, there's hope of some kind.
I agree that there's hope, but also there's a time factor, because once we blink a few times, there's the midterm election, then there's another presidential election. So some people are on the current president of the United States say, look, let's get going, because the time never lost a fight, because again, let alone those fights aren't short fights. They're long fights. So just putting out there. Any other final comments from our panel today?
Elle, do you want to go ahead? Or
I'm good. I think we've said everything. So. Yeah.
And how can people get in contact with you, Ms. Elle Jones, while you're in lockdown?
People can always email me, l.jones@msvu, that's Mount St. Vincent University.ca. As always, my Facebook is kind of hard to get into, and that's it though. But you can always email me, or catch me at all these events and things.
Thank you so much. Continue to stay safe. Cesar.
First of all, I'd like to report some, I put probably a white supremacist in the comments by the name of Paul Gremon criticizing activist player LeBron James. Paul, you are, I see you. We have to call out the racists. We have to call out those that, beyond the difference of opinions, try to always push back on any Black advances. This is what always happens. One thing that I wanted to address, Sarah Onyango, I agree 100% when she talked in terms of representation. Pan-Africanism is not simply about having inclusivity of Black people in the place, it's about what type of Black people. And as such, remembering some of our leaders, such as Fred Hampton in the United States, but also Patrice Lumumba and so many others, it is not so much that our lives and our destinies are to be defined by white, Arab, etc., non-Blacks, but it's for us to define them. And as such, in the Black community, we need to keep elevating the identity, the racial pride, the ideology of our Black children, youth, but also adults, to dare to be Black unapologetically. We saw it very well as Sarah was talking about Daniel Cameron and political interest in the MAGA movement. And we saw it so well with the prosecution, in the Derek Chauvin trial, in which fact, science, the evidence that everybody sees was being addressed. That's basically what I will say, and I'm reachable, of course, my Facebook, Cesar Rimy, R-I-M-Y. People can reach me there anytime.
No problem. And finally, to our special guest of the day, but a special friend in our hearts, Sarah Onyango.
And big fan of the show. So this is kind of, I'm geeking out here.
Yes.
Never mind the haters. There's always going to be, the white supremacists and the haters who are going to insult our athletes, and thank God for them, LeBron, our Toronto Raptors, etc. More power to you. Keep doing what you do, Colin Kaepernick, because we need everybody, all hands on deck here. So I can be reached at the Black on Black Hotmail. It's blackonblack891@hotmail.com. And like I said, you can hear our show every Saturday from 11 a.m. to noon at CHUO 89.1 FM in Ottawa, or online at chuo.fm. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, it's Dr. Vibe here. I'm the host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations 2020 Best Podcast News Award winner and 2018 Innovation Award winner given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. Also, once a month, I host an online broadcast for fathers and dads, the only one in the world that is sponsored by Dove Men Care. It's also co-sponsored by Dad Central, Canada's national fatherhood organization. And I'm also the board chair of the Global Food and Drink Initiative, whose goal is to showcase Blacks in the diaspora that are doing it in food, wine, and travel. As always, I'd like to thank everyone who watched live or on the replay. It's appreciated, not taken for granted. Big also shout out to BIA Media. And as always, when I close out, I say, live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get small to get stronger. Block assumptions that aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. Love, faith, and respect. And remember to give yourself grace. God bless, peace well, keep the faith, and take care, everyone.